The following live-streamed program is made possible by Atlanta Video Network, making your streams come true.
My Georgia, oh Georgia, get it home way through. This old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk to Me. And yes, Georgia is on the mind of the nation this week and for the next few weeks, and especially with our guest who is running for the 5th District Congressional seat. His name is Kwanza Hall in a special election. Kwanza, thank you so much for joining us. You're running for a seat that was held by a revered civil rights icon who you knew. How does that feel, man?
It feels great. Thank you, Maynard, for having me today. And in light of COVID, you figured it out how to stay in the mix and use technology to get the word out there and to make sure that the political conversations that need to be had are being had. So I want to say thanks. It feels good because, you know, sometimes you think you're ready for something and actually you're being prepared for something else. So I spent 15 years elected and really thought I'd kind of close the chapter on running for office, at least for the near term. And it seems like I just got called right back into this when Congressman Lewis passed away. I wasn't planning to run for office, but when I thought about the gap that was being left, the fact that we've been for more than 3 or 4 months without representation in Washington in one of the most challenging times of the last century, one of the most significant years. 2020 has been a doozy for everyone. I accepted the call to offer myself for public service, and I'm overjoyed to be able to do it. It's a very special moment. It's not for a long time, but it's for a very significant set of agenda items that are in front of us.
Well, this is a 5th District, a special election runoff. You are going against an academician, Dr. Robert Franklin, and you're a child of the civil rights movement, which of course was John Lewis's call to fame. 2 different types of candidates. What makes you the favorite, you think? And you did win the general election.
Yes, we did win the general election, and we have high name ID, which we will continue to try to bank on, as well as, you know, we've been, you know, in the trenches doing the work in this body politic as a public servant. I haven't tried to be just political and do the traditional political strategic things. I've really focused on service as my calling card as an elected official. And I think that does speak volumes in terms of the work I've been able to get done. I've passed over 752 pieces of legislation. I've helped to attract $2 billion plus in investment to the council district that I represented. And frankly, what we've been able to do is just present my case, you know, as track record, number one, as experience, number two, as ability to actually get things done in very challenging environments. Local government is where the rubber meets the road. It's not easy. And especially in these times when we have a short period of time to do anything. When you have such a short window, you've got to be able to get through all the rigmarole of understanding what it means to be an elected official and truly focus on what must I do and what can I do to navigate Washington, you know, as many people call it, the swamp. And it's not all swamp, but there are some portions that have quagmires and have, you know, black water and alligators and everything else. But towards getting something done on behalf of the constituents of District 5, and number two, thinking about our country as a whole and the world and the challenges that are in front of us to make the wisest decisions for the most, what may be some of the most significant votes in front of us. One, the coronavirus stimulus package, the CARES Act is in front of us. And hopefully my push would be to see a compromise, not stalemate, and disconnect between the parties. Number two, there's cannabis reform which would cause expungement of records for the lives of people who were impacted by the 1994 crime bill and other such measures across the country over the last 20 years or so. And then we also have the Electoral College vote, which more than likely comes up the second week of December. And that vote is very significant because right now we still have a contested election, although the numbers speak that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have won and are president and vice president elect. There's still some discontent in the current president's cabinet and his team, and even with Republican leadership, because the numbers were very close, but still it looks like we won and it feels like we won, but it's not being acknowledged. And because of that disconnect does put some of the responsibility in the hands of Congress, and it probably also puts some of the responsibility in the hands of the judges that could have been appointed by President Trump and or the Supreme Court. So we've got some things out here in the water that we've got to pay very close attention to as we go into a holiday season when families and children have been cash strapped, have been dealing with the challenges of education at home, the challenges of loss of work and career, loss of business. These are difficult times. And frankly, I'm feeling like 30 days in office might feel like 3 years in office for the amount of energy that will need to be put in on more than likely 18-hour basis to move anything forward, to talk to everyone and to make sure that District 5 is represented, but also that we're thinking of the collective of the United States in the process.
Kwanza, I've had the pleasure of writing and reporting about you as a city councilman for years and as an Atlanta mayoral candidate. And it was fun to watch you walk up and down Auburn Avenue, greeting people, getting things done throughout your career. And you were a jovial, charismatic kind of guy. But even that charisma, what can you get done in 30 days in D.C.? Is it going to be worth it for you, sir?
Absolutely. I mean, if you've been in elected office, and let me just say it this way, let's think of some of our former mayors. If you gave Mayor Reed 1 week in office, would he get something done? If you gave Mayor Franklin 1 week in office, would she get something done? If you gave Mayor Bill Campbell 1 week in office, will he get something done? That's really the thought. That's the approach. I actually have worked in a legislative body. I've passed legislative measures. I'm wise enough to know that I can't do everything. I'm wise enough to know that you've got to have relationships and you've got to work with leadership on all sides to move your agenda forward. You've got to be able to be nimble. You've got to be thoughtful. You've got to work with local constituencies to help move what makes the most sense for it. There's probably some resolutions that we could pass, but also more than anything, it's kind of piling on. It's like playing in a football game, and if you're on the team and you sit on the bench for the whole 3 quarters, and then people are like, why did they put him in the last 3 minutes? Well, he ended up kicking the field goal, which was a winning field goal, but that's the only thing he did, but it was a winning field goal. My objective is to do exactly the same type of thing, to just go in to score for District 5 and bring it back home for us. No, nothing else. I'm not into it for the shine, the fanfare. I don't have to be on camera unnecessarily. It's not about that. It's about actually getting things done. Now, if that helps to drive an agenda forward, great. But, I don't even have to go meet with everyone in the way that most folks would usually try to run an office, because I've already done those ceremonial things. This is really more about actually delivering on what potentially could be delivered. And there's some things I have in mind. There's some things that my friends in Washington are suggesting. And of course, there are things that the party is driving, Democratic Party, Democratic leadership. There are things that Republican leadership is driving in the House. And then there are things that the White House is driving, and there's things that the president-elect, and they're not all aligned. So just when you lay that out, it's 5 or 6 different, groups that are pushing an agenda. And then the business community is wondering, hey, what the hell is going on down there? Can y'all just cut a deal? That's being said. Can you just get a deal done? You can't have it all sometimes. So cut the baby in half and let's move it forward for our country. That's what you have to be willing to cede and compromise. You only compromise if it's in a direction in which you're already going, is what one of my teachers taught me. And we make this compromise quickly we'll be able to have a new president. And the president can continue for the next 4 years. Sometimes if you're not willing to cede something to get over the finish line, you never get there. So that's my posture coming in.
You use the phrase cut a deal. There are those, politically and pundits alike, who think the Congresswoman-elect for the 5th District, Senator Nakima Wilson, cut a deal unfairly. Jennison took that job as opposed to leaving it open to many others like yourself. Are you working with her since she's going to have the office next?
So Congresswoman-elect Nakima Williams and I have been friends for a long time. I've known her since, I was a school board member. So this isn't a new relationship. We've had a really strong rapport. She's helped me. I've helped her. We've even worked on campaigns together, in particular Hillary Clinton's campaign. So this is, she's a friend. And I think, this is one of those awkward moments where no one predicted that Congressman Lewis would pass away when he did and how he did at that particular juncture. And after having already been placed on the ballot, I know there are a lot of people who are upset about the way it went down, upset about the state laws, upset about, a lot of things right now in our country. But, the way I feel, this is one of those things, if you're driving on the highway and, you spill something in the back of the car, there's a mistake made or there's some challenge to something in the car. Sometimes you can't pull off the road to fight about that when you really need to get to grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. You get what I mean? Let's get home, y'all. I'm really in the posture of, can we get it over the finish line right now? What that means? Well, elect Kwanza Hall for Congress so I can get down in there and use the experience and skill sets and relationships that I have to help support an agenda that moves our country forward from most likely a pure Democratic perspective. That's where I come from. But I'm not opposed to working with the business community who generally happen to be Republican. Then second, to get our president-elect and vice president-elect, secure the vote for them on the electoral college to make sure that they are able to go into office and take our country forward as well. And then as we look forward into the future, there's the CARES Act helps to stabilize so much right now. People are starting to feel that those checks ran out, and it's the holiday season. And, holiday season is known for a time when crime happens, but crime can go up a whole lot more if people don't know where they're going to get their next meal, how they're going to take care of the holiday for their children. Sometimes in desperate times, people make very desperate measures. We don't want to see ourselves go into that type of situation. And we've got this bubbling up of something that we all should be very, very concerned about. And that's this potential for violence between those who supported President Trump and those who did not. When I saw those guns drawn at CNN and it was Democrats and Republicans, left and right with guns, I did not like that feeling here in Atlanta. Now, there used to be peaceful protests over at CNN, and it's gone to AR-15s in people's hands and more than one standing opposing each other at CNN. What does that say about where we are? What does it say about the lack of accord and the disconnects that are inherent and that are getting greater, not decreasing? So we've got some real work in front of us. And so I'm not really caught up in the small things of that type in this moment. I'm concerned about us healing, us unifying, us driving an agenda that is thoughtful about our reality, not about some starry-eyed vision, because this country divided down the middle in this election. Regardless of what anyone says, Joe Biden won the popular vote, but the numbers in those states that are that have greater electoral college numbers have all these aberrations that are unfortunate. We had aberrations last go around and no one called Republicans on it, but this time now they're calling them out and they're using the judicial system to fight, and that's not really cool. But what we must do is make sure that it doesn't devolve into violence, because if it's violent, still that puts African Americans in a very precarious situation in this country, a country that still kind of has labeled as 3/5 a man.
You sound very concerned for a young man.
I am.
You think this country's at a dangerous point, do you know?
Yes. And in addition, we know that, at the hands of law enforcement, we've seen countless examples of Black men, Black women, poor people being killed, not just, arrested or not just accosted, but actually losing their lives on camera repeatedly in situations that it was absolutely uncalled for to even have any force. Traffic stops, things like that devolve into the loss of life. If that's not telling us that the handwriting's on the wall and there's some signs that we should be really concerned about, when the COVID crisis hit in March, there was a run on guns and bullets in all the stores. And it happened again more recently. That should tell us everybody is strapped with more than one weapon. And I'm not talking about handguns. This is serious, and we need to take it serious and not act like it's not existing. Because when it does, if something does happen, and more than likely it does in small skirmishes, the question is how we're going to stop it and what measures and who's going to stand up to make sure we don't go in that direction. Because you've got people in all walks of life who are willing to jump over the fence and devolve into this type of violence. I take it very serious because I can feel the energy. You can feel it all over the country. You can see it on camera. You see everyone has guns, and we're acting like it's not there. And people are having hard times.
Kwanza, I got to ask you, since, I work for SCLC, and your father, Leon Hall, was a legendary civil rights figure at SCLC. What do you think he'd be saying about where we are now? What the problems you just articulated? These are different times, but much the same, are they not?
Yes, I think we're definitely approaching somewhat of a rollback in some ways on some ideas that we thought we had put to bed, and I think they were buried, but they've come back from the grave. That's one idea. I'm sure that he would be alarmed, and many others like him would be alarmed. Number two, I think they would also see that there has been significant progress that has been made, but it's kind of progress, but then it has an undercurrent of still that same vestige of slavery and the vestiges of racism and Jim Crow and the black codes and all of the things that still emanate out of the institutionalized racism, the institutionalized discrimination that has been part and part of this country. It's deep in the DNA. So because it's so deep in the DNA, we've got to figure out how we root it out. And that's what I think my father and many others, would be turning over in their graves right now about, because they also feel that our generation doesn't quite recognize how serious it is in front of us. And, there's a difference in our age. I'm 49, I turned 50. And those even younger than me, they're protesting, but it's kind of, in some cases, a rebel without a cause, because when we get to the table, the negotiation parts aren't there. We're not negotiating for the significant structural change that must happen. It's not about a protest. It's about actually the structural change and deciding and determining how and when we actually make the structural change happen. That's where the rubber meets the road. And it's a lot more difficult because we've got it in every aspect of life, from sports to healthcare to any field. You've got places where inroads and strides have been made, but you've got still significant challenges when you run the numbers, because the numbers don't lie. The surface level things you can see, and it's like, oh, it looks great. But when you run the numbers, the outcomes and the success rates and the numbers that tell you, how many people have made progress, how many people have X, Y, and Z, you start running them. You're like, well, there's only one African American who's done that. And there's only, 2% of this and 4% of that. And you're like, whoa, did you know that there were 2 million people impacted by the 1994 crime bill in jail? And then there were 760,000 people who were slaves in 1860. So what are we saying? I mean, it's slave labor in these jails, run by private corporations. So this prison, the school to prison pipeline is a real thing, and there's a lot of civil rights folks who kind of later in their career, like Connie Curry, held on to that as one of the places where we're losing the most. because the predictions still go back to that first, second, and third grade outcome determines what the jail beds look like. And there's something wrong with that. That's how this country decides its future. And that future has a direct impact on our community, the African American community, and communities in urban areas and rural poor.
Voting has started already in your special election, has it not? And what do you think your dad and others of the civil rights movement are going to think if should you win and take that oath of Congress? You'll be making history too, won't you?
Yes, it will be a historic moment. I think we're in one of the most interesting election periods we've ever seen. It's been 5 elections, if I'm not mistaken. There was a June, there was an August, there was a September, there's this race, and now we've got the November, and then we have this race, and then we have a January race. This is a really interesting time. I think we've partially done a little bit of a disservice to bringing out more votes because everyone decided to skip over this race and spend the millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, on the January 5th outcome. Whereas this particular race gives you one more reason, one more opportunity to get a fresh voter to participate in the process. And every moment we get to get someone to try it out, it's like going for Thanksgiving and going for a Christmas dinner or holiday dinner, and your grandmother always offers you, this mac and cheese or that kind of pie, and you never eat it. But one time when you do actually try it, it turns out to be your favorite and you didn't know you'd like it. I think the same model has to be applied to voting. We've got to continue to give opportunities and continue to focus on elections. Don't call elections as not being valuable and not being important, even though it's 30 days. That's kind of been the storyline. And I think it's an unintentional but consequence that creates voter suppression when we still want our voters. These new young voters have never participated. And if this is the election that gets them in the process, let's use it as a way to do that. But going fast forwarding back to what you were saying, the idea of me being able to take an oath, raise my right hand and put my left hand on the Bible, it was significant when I became a school board member, further significant when I became a city councilman. And again, it will be equally, if not greater and more significant. I know my father testified before Congress on the student pushout and other measures related to civil rights and anti-discrimination and nonviolent social change related to the King Center and that type of work. So I know he would be happy. And I know my mom right now is so overjoyed, and she's doing her phone banking with all of her friends to try to ensure that we win this race and we get over the finish line. Because again, to whom much is given, much is required. And when I was sitting there watching Congressman Lewis's funeral, there was one picture that stuck in my head that was a family picture. And it's a picture of a man being drugged by the police. And for most of my life, I never knew who this man was. And it was only in 2016. And I asked my mom, we were looking at pictures at home and just kind of glancing through them on a Sunday and said, Mom, who's this guy? It's always been in the house. Who is it? She's like, boy, that's your dad.
Oh, wow.
That's your father.
Wow.
And
Wow.
It's in the 60s and it looks just like a George Floyd moment, And when I saw it, I almost came to a tear because it dawned on me right in that moment, not then, but when I was watching the funeral, that there's much more work to be done because we're still seeing the same things that happened in 1960s happening right now before our very eyes on live TV, on live internet, lives being taken by officers whose jobs are to protect and serve and save lives. And I love our police who volunteer their lives to protect us. But there's something wrong with the training. We've got to reimagine public safety in our country. And we can start with District 5 as a new model. We've got to come out of the way that we've been doing it because it is not right. It is unjust, the structural system. But it's not all their fault because they're only doing what they've been trained to do. So the training is broken. and it needs to be reinvented. It needs to be disrupted. Like education, public safety needs disruption to make it work for all people. It was not designed. It came out of the slave codes, and the slave patrols were who these officers were. And so if that's what you were patrolling to look for slaves, you really don't see a different model, even if you don't know subconsciously that it should be. So that's really, how I think my father would feel and how I know my mother feels right now. And she initially said, when I talked to her about running, she texted my brother, said, tell him, don't do it. Don't do it. No. And, when I explained to her why I felt so compelled, she really got it. I just come off of having coronavirus in the summer, in July, and it really hurt me. It set me back. I had a fever of 103. I spent 4 days with that, with body aches and chills and no sense of taste and smell. I had every symptom, everything that's on that list I had. And I just had to brave it out at home. I didn't want to go to a doctor. I didn't have anybody to come here because what could they do? They come and get sick. I had every medicine. I had all my herbs and spices and food and water and so I just had to tough it out for 3 weeks. That experience really got my attention, and it gave me a lot of time to be reflective and, to count on the Lord. I mean, I have to say that. I'll say it. I believe in God, and, God is in my life, and God put his hand on me in that moment and got my attention. And when I didn't, I kept on moving, and then the funeral happened. And as I watched that funeral, it was like something was hitting me in the head like this, saying, hey, wait a minute. I got another assignment for you. Remember that picture? Well, that work's not done. I know you think you've done some work, but you really have not finished. You just got started. I just started you. I was building a platform for you to do uniquely what I have for you to do. And that's what I've embraced. And a lot of people are like, well, man, that sounds pretty heavy. I said, yeah, well, because it really is. I spent 15 years elected. I don't care what you say. I've enjoyed not being elected for a little while. It's not a bad thing to enjoy your life and not have to be accountable to everyone, not to have to walk around basically butt naked with everybody in your stuff. You could just live a normal life. I don't think people understand how enjoyable that can be because they've never been elected. But actually, their inverse is great. Not being elected was a cool thing, and it still is cool. That's why this short-term service isn't a bad thing, because it means I'm going to just do an assignment. I don't have all of the things I'm supposed to do, but I know those ones I outlined already are a part of it.
Kwanza Hall, God's best to you in this runoff election. And let me hear your voice, your pitch to your voters as we end this show. Take care.
Thank you, Maynard.
The vote is the most powerful, non-violent instrument that we have.
The time is now to elect a justice fighter to complete John Lewis's term in Congress. Elect me, Kwanza Hall, to protect your voting rights. I will fight for COVID relief checks for everybody, and I will demand justice reform and help Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff win. Vote early today and elect me to fight for you in Congress. I'm Kwanza Hall, and I approve this message.